The Labor Day incident. On the night of September 1st, 1969, in Berkshire County, Massachusetts, over 250 people reported seeing a UFO. Interestingly, the people involved in this incident, and especially those who claim to have been pulled into the UFO, take offense to it being called an abduction. They have never used the word abduction to describe the encounters, which is very different from other notable abduction cases. The most famous encounter from this incident was alleged to occur in Sheffield near Old Covert Bridge. Thomas Reed, aged 6, and his family were crossing the bridge when they saw a disc-shaped object hovering in the air. Reed described the craft as a white orb that was bigger than a football field. They tried escaping the UFO by continuing to drive down Covert Bridge Lane, but the craft followed them. Reed said that the car was engulfed in a bright white light and they were pulled inside the UFO. When he took a polygraph test, he was found to be 99.1% truthful, which is a crazy result. Another alleged incident that happened occurred at Lake Mansfield in Great Barrington. Melanie Kirchdorfer, 14 at the time, and her family had gone to the lake. When her father backed into the parking lot, a very bright light engulfed their car. Everyone began to panic, so her father decided to chase the light, despite Melanie begging him not to. She and her sister began to shake in fear. Which blew my mind, man. Who does that? On your own, do what you gotta do, man. But when your kids are begging you and shaking, I think it's time to leave, personally. Her sister did not remember anything after that, besides levitating and then being on a ship where she was laid out inside it, recalling being in a room with several other children. Thomas Reed, interestingly, stated that he saw the young Melanie aboard the ship with a petrified expression on her face, though she had no recollection of seeing him. The other children began to disappear one by one. After that, she woke up at the lake by herself, where she would have to walk home. Meanwhile, Tom remembered at the same time being laid down on his back at the other end of his family's property. Another person, Tommy Warner, claims that he was also abducted on the same evening. His babysitter, Debbie, corroborates his story, saying she saw him vanish into a bright ray of light after Warner told her he was being advised to leave by God's voice. Since the alleged abductions, the people involved have been intent on finding proof of alien life. So much so that some of them drove members of their own family as well as work colleagues away. Whatever the case was, on the night of September 1st, 1969, for people to believe in something so much that they push their family and friends away says to me that there has to be a certain degree of truth to the mystery. But I am no expert, and that is why the comments section is there, so use it and tell me what you think, man. The Brooklyn Bridge Abduction. On November 30th, 1989, a woman, Linda Napolitano, housewife and mother of 2, claimed she was abducted by aliens from her apartment in Manhattan. She said she was beamed out of her apartment into a UFO where she was met by a group of small beings. What makes this story rather intriguing is the fact that her story has 23 witnesses to the event, though it's worth noting the majority of them have never been identified. It all started at around 3 a.m. Linda claimed she was sleeping next to her husband when she suddenly was jolted awake. In her bones, she could feel that something wasn't right, that something was in the room with her. She then claims 3 grey bipedal creatures abducted her from her 12th floor apartment. She was paralysed and lifted through a blue beam of light into a spaceship near the Brooklyn Bridge, which 23 people also reported seeing. The aliens performed experiments on her before returning her to her bedroom. Aboard the craft, small grey beings stood over her, looking at her with large black eyes. According to Linda, they spoke to her telepathically, telling her to be quiet, and she found herself paralysed and unable to call out for any help. The creatures brought her into an examination room where they laid her out on a table and inserted a strange metallic device into her nose. Linda then woke up in her bed next to her husband as if nothing had ever happened. At first, she wrote the whole thing off as an incredibly vivid dream. However, she noticed a lump in the side of her nose. A doctor inspected it, and an X-ray, allegedly taken of her nasal passage, appeared to show that there was indeed something lodged inside. Later, a throat and nose specialist allegedly examined her and found that the object was gone, but there was still a build-up of cartilage that suggested something had been lodged there recently, which is just incredibly strange to me, man. Linda took her story to Bud Hopkins, an artist and ufologist with decades of experience researching alien phenomena. In 1996, Hopkins published a book, and soon Linda was making headlines. According to Hopkins, she contacted him shortly after her alleged abduction. However, his investigation really began in 1991 when he received a mysterious letter from a pair of security guards. In their letter, the men claimed that on the night of November 30th, 1989, they were parked under FDR Drive when they saw 3 alien figures and a woman in a white nightgown floating out of an apartment window and into a UFO. The guards, who called themselves Richard and Dan, said they couldn't live with themselves for not helping the woman. After Richard and Dan got in touch with Bud and learned that the woman was still alive and kicking, they visited her at her Manhattan apartment. They were reportedly emotional upon seeing her, and the 3 spoke as if they'd known each other for years. Things would get chaotic, to say the least, for Linda though from that point onward, as the guards began stalking her and even kidnapped her on numerous occasions, interrogating her about what she knew regarding the aliens, and even going as far as making her show them her feet to prove she wasn't one herself. Luckily, every time she was able to escape the kidnapping, relatively free of harm, besides the mental torment, I would imagine. The sheer number of witnesses proves that something really did happen that night to most alien believers. However, people have pointed out that most of these witnesses refused to give interviews or to identify themselves, and Bud Hopkins himself admitted he'd never met the guards personally. Given the lack of concrete evidence, there's nothing to say that this case did indeed happen. Linda has always stuck to her story since it happened though, and even claimed to be being followed by men in black suits for a long period of time, making her fear for her life on numerous occasions. The Manhattan Alien Abduction is a 3-episode Netflix documentary mini-series about Linda's case. It was released in the United States on October 30th, 2024. The 3-part series describes her claim to have been repeatedly beamed into a spaceship from her bedroom, and includes commentary from her supporters as well as her detractors. This story generated new media attention in 2024 because Linda and some supporters sued Netflix for defamation. So what are we left with? A woman who stuck to her story for over 30 years, backed by bizarre witness testimony, or a complicated hoax that spiraled into a dangerous obsession for everyone involved? The case of Linda remains one of the most debated abduction stories of all time. What do you believe happened that night over the Brooklyn Bridge? Let me know in the comments below, man. Abduction in the alley. On the morning of 30th of March 1988, Helen Thomas would begin her day like any other morning in Birmingham, England. After making a call at her mother's house, she would then make her way to the mill where she and her daughter worked. They would take the same route as normal, which included going through alleyways in between decade-old housing estates. Whilst in one of these alleys, the quietness of the early morning would erupt with a persistent humming. At the same time, a blinding light shined upon the pair from above, like someone was shining a bright torch, Carol, the daughter, would later recall. The light grew closer and closer until it was almost directly on top of the 2 women.
We saw this sort of a round object.
The spaceship, what we're seeing, was sort of like
It
rounded.
was sort of going flat, more or less to the top of it, with this sort of a thing, just...
And that's sort of like a bit missing.
And then there was a beam of light, which come all the way down.
A torch shining.
And we sort of held each other in this beam of light.
I was standing here, and my mum was on the other side of me there, and we sort of held each other.
Got back into the moon.
Next thing they knew, they were walking again through the alley with the light now gone. Helen's leather jacket was soaking wet, though the pathway was bone dry. Confusion and disorientation clouded both women's minds. They eventually arrived at work, both quiet and concerned about what had just happened. Only when the security guard at the gate relayed they were both very late did they realise they could not account for several hours. Over the following weeks, both women would experience random blistering on their face and arms. Each also suddenly began to suffer nosebleeds and notice strange discharge from their noses. It would be 6 years before the 2 would talk about what happened, finally reporting it to UFO researcher Tony Dodd, only doing so in the end to piece together their fragmented memories of the morning. After listening to their account and curious about the missing time, Dodd would suggest the 2 use hypnotic regression to reveal what actually happened to them.
He's touching my face. touching my hair now, looking at my heart. They're looking at my eyes.
What basically is happening is people are being examined medically. They're having toenails removed, they're having hair removed, they're having skin samples removed. I think what impressed me most about this case is the fact that when they were under hypnosis at separate times, the stories, the graphic descriptions, the things that were done to them were absolutely identical. What they did to one person, they did to another person.
His skin feels wet. He's put his hand on my face. My face feels wet.
Strange creatures surrounded the table, not very tall and with large heads and equally large eyes. Long arms stretched from their frail-looking body, with each sporting a three-fingered hand on the end. Their skin shone an off-white colour and appeared wet and wrinkled. Their touch had a cold feel to it when they pressed their hands on Carol's body. They pressed in particular on her navel, before pushing a glass tube into her belly button.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Which is one of the creepiest things I've read in a very long time, man. She could not feel any pain, but for reasons she didn't understand, she knew they had taken eggs from her. Following this intense examination, one of the creatures showed her to a large screen on the wall, where strange symbols appeared, along with footage of war and conflict. One of her strangest memories was of being taller than the rest, which was a male with long blonde hair and blue eyes. He wore a silver suit, and Carol could recall seeing a distinctive badge or emblem on it, a blue badge that contained a circle, a triangle and two wavy lines. The alleged experience of Carol and Helen Thomas stands out for its overlap in missing time, shared hallucinations, physical marks and the suggestion of bizarre tests by unknown beings. The pair's recollection, uncovered years after the event, is compelling because it includes consistent but discrete memories under hypnosis and hints at a wider phenomenon beyond isolated individual cases. A very creepy case indeed, more so for me than the others, man, because it's in the UK. Personally, I think given the fact that their stories remain the same for so long and they kept quiet about the whole thing for as long as they did, shows that they were not in the story for fame or money, and they just wanted answers, man. Which makes me think this one may indeed be a genuine one. But more importantly, what do you think? The Hills were a couple that lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was a World War II veteran employed by the United States Postal Service, while Betty was a social worker. They were members of the NACP and were community leaders. They were an interracial couple at a time when it was particularly uncommon in the United States. They are the grandparents of UFC fighter Angela Hill. On the night of September 19th, 1961, couple Barney and Betty Hill claimed they were abducted by extraterrestrials. The couple were from the United States and claimed the incident happened in the rural portion of New Hampshire. The case would later be known as the Hills abduction and the Zeta Reticuli incident. This was because a star map was shown to Betty and two ufologists connected it to the Zeta Reticuli system. Their story was adapted into the best-selling 1966 book, The Interrupted Journey, and NBC's 1975 television film, The UFO Incident. According to various reports given by the Hills and officials involved, the couple were returning from a vacation in Niagara Falls and Montreal, driving back to their home in Portsmouth. At around 10:30 in the evening, the couple claimed to have seen a UFO on September the 19th.
Crossed over the border into New Hampshire, and I think we started to see this light following. Actually, in the very beginning, I noticed a bright light in the sky, and I thought I was discovering a new planet until it started to move. And this was about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night.
Husband Barney navigated US Route 3. Betty tried to rationalise what she saw, saying it may have been a falling star. Only problem being, it moved upward. Because it moved so erratically and grew bigger and brighter, Betty suggested the couple stop the car for a closer look, as well as to walk their dog Delsey. Barney stopped at the scenic picnic area just south of Twin Mountain. Looking through binoculars, Betty saw an oddly shaped craft with multiple bright lights flashing, making its way across the moon's surface. When Barney took a look at it, he thought it may have just been an airplane. However, the craft, as he was looking at it, without any sort of turning motion, suddenly began to head in his and Betty's direction.
Now that was in about the Lancaster area.
So,
And then it followed us for about 30 miles. Paced our car.
and all the while you and Barney were discussing it. What is this? What is
Yeah.
that?
Yes, see, Barney did in World War II. He knew planes. And he's trying to identify this. And it's flying in a very erratic manner, which was very puzzling to us. But this is 61. We'd heard UFO. Well, actually, in those days they called them flying saucers. We had
Getting back in their car and continuing down the road, they drove real slow and carried on watching the craft as it continued heading in their direction, passing over a restaurant and signal tower at one point on top of Cannon Mountain, coming out near Man of the Mountain, which is a series of 5 granite cliff ledges on Cannon Mountain. Betty said it was at least 40 foot long and looked like it was rotating. They both watched as the craft moved silently but erratically around the night sky, bouncing up and down. Both Betty and Barney said about a mile south of Indian Head, which is a mountain with a distinct head shape, the object rapidly descended toward their vehicle, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway.
And at that point, it left the top of the mountain, came out over the highway, and stopped in midair directly in front of us, maybe about 50 feet in the sky. So Barney got out with the binoculars in an attempt to identify the craft. And when he looked up, he saw a circular window with a bright light behind it, and he saw these men standing behind the window looking down at him. And at that point, the craft began to descend, and he became frightened. Ran back to the car saying he thought they were trying to capture him. So we got in the car and we went speeding down the highway to avoid capture.
As the hills sped away, they heard a strange beeping sound and they fell into a daze, falling unconscious. When they awoke, they realised they were now just outside of Concord on September the 20th, a day after the alleged abduction. Arriving home at about dawn, they stated that they had some odd sensations and impulses that they could not easily explain away. Betty insisted their luggage be kept near the back door rather than in the main part of the house. Their watches would never work. Barney said that the leather strap for the binoculars was torn, though he had no recollection of him tearing it. His shoes were scraped. He also stated he was compelled to examine his genitals in the bathroom.
What did he say?
Though he found nothing unusual. They both took long showers to remove possible contaminations and each drew a picture of what they saw. Mind boggled, the Hills tried to reconstruct the order of events as they witnessed the UFO and drove home. But immediately after they heard the buzzing sounds, their memories become foggy, almost like they were blocked out. After sleeping for a few hours, Betty awoke and placed the shoes and clothing she had worn during the drive into her closet, stating that the dress was torn at the hem, zipper and lining. Later, when she went back into her closet, she noted a pinkish powder on her dress. When she hung it up on the clothesline, the pink powder blew away, but the dress was damaged beyond repair. She threw it away at first, but then changed her mind, and over the years, 5 laboratories have conducted chemical and forensic analysis on the dress, but the analyses found no evidence of any unidentified DNA, meaning there was no proof of an alien encounter. There were shiny concentric circles on their car's trunk that had not been there the previous day. Betty and Barney experimented with a compass on the spots, noting that when they moved it close, the needle would whirl rapidly, but when they moved it away from the spots, it would stop. 10 days after the alleged encounter, Betty began having a series of vivid dreams, which continued for 5 nights. When she mentioned them to Barney, he was sympathetic but not too concerned, and the matter was dropped, and she never mentioned the dreams again. She began writing down the details of her dreams. In one, she and Barney encountered a roadblock and men were surrounding their vehicle. She lost consciousness, and when she awoke, she realised she was being forced by 2 small men to walk in a forest at night, seeing Barney walking behind her, though when she called out to him, he seemed to be in a trance or sleepwalking. The men stood about 5 foot to 5 foot 4 inches tall and wore matching blue uniforms, with caps similar to those worn by military cadets. They appeared nearly human, with black hair, dark eyes, prominent noses and bluish lips. Their skin was a greyish colour. She and Barney were taken to their car, where the leader suggested that they wait to watch the craft's departure. What do you think of this case so far? Let me know your thoughts down below, man, and while you're there, there's a little button with subscribe written on it. Click on it for me, it's free, and if you don't like my content, you can always unsubscribe, man. Betty and Barney would go under hypnosis to try and piece together their memories of what happened. First, we'll talk about Barney's sessions. Under hypnosis with Dr. Benjamin Solomon, he reported that the binocular strap had broken when he ran from the UFO back to his car. He recalled driving the car away from the UFO, but afterwards he felt irresistibly compelled to pull off the road and drive into the woods. While Betty reported a conversation with the leader in English, Barney said that he heard them speaking in a mumbling language he did not understand. Betty also mentioned this detail. The few times they were communicated with, Barney said it seemed to be thought transference at the time. He was unfamiliar with the word telepathy. In Betty's sessions, her account was similar to her 5 dreams about the UFO abductions, with some notable differences, mainly pertaining to her capture and release. Also, the technology on the craft was different. The short men differed significantly in physical appearance, and the order of the abduction was different. Barney and Betty's memories in hypnotic regressions were, however, consistent with one another. The hypnosis sessions with the Hills did not lead to a definitive conclusion about the reality of their alleged alien abduction. While the sessions did uncover detailed memories of the events, including a star map allegedly shown to Betty, Dr. Simon ultimately concluded that the experience was likely a fabrication rooted in the couple's anxieties and imaginations. The Hills went back to their regular lives. They were willing to discuss the alleged UFO encounter with friends, family, and the occasional UFO researcher. But the Hills made no effort to seek publicity. Barney died of a cerebral hemorrhage on February 25, 1969, at the age of 46, after which Betty went on to become a celebrity in the UFO community. She died of cancer on October 17, 2004, at age 85, never having remarried. Overall, I find this to be a very interesting case, and whether or not you believe it's true, it sits as one of the earliest cases of possible alien abduction. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.